annual updates return, with Forza Horizon 3 hitting consoles and PC last year. We now see the latest Forza 7 hit the demo scene on both Windows 10 platforms on PC and the Xbox One, or the Xbox One S in this case that I'm testing here. Now, we've seen much of Forza 7 already, but it's been the shining beacon for Xbox players to show off the Xbox One X and its 4K 60Hz target. But that won't become a reality for us public plebs until November 7th. So instead, the mainstream masses are left with the Xbox One S or PC, which we can take a look at ahead of its launch. So here I'm comparing a GTX 970 paired with an Intel i5 CPU, a 4690K, and it's against an Xbox One S. The first option is obviously options. They're far more expansive on PC, allowing you to change the dynamic scaling solution. Now, this game, like the last Forza, is completely set up to dynamically scale every element, so the engine is impressively tailored and monitored to keep that scaling dynamic across the whole frame, just to make sure that it hits that head target of 60 FPS as a bare minimum. But we instantly see issues on the PC version. Now, the Xbox One S is completely smooth in action. We'll get to that point in a minute, but there are a couple of points in the demo where the menu screens can stutter a couple of seconds or so, but nothing major. This isn't the case on the PC. I know this sounds negative, but it really performs quite badly on the PC at this point. Just loading into the menu and picking the car and then going into the options screen can take far too long. Loading is also much longer overall on PC. But in terms of performance, obviously you can scale everything to whack it up to maximum 4K. And there's an inbuilt benchmark to give you an idea, which you can see on screen here running on a GTX 970 with said CPU at 4K. Isn't really doing the job at all, and this is dynamic scaling, so dropping it down to 1440p does deliver a pretty much lock solid 60 FPS in terms of its GPU load and CPU load. There are some dynamic scaling settings. You can see what I've done in the menus here to get the best out of the PC, but once you've done all of that and go into the game, it still does not remove these small hiccups and lags that happen during play. And there's one in this demo section here, and I've only played for like an hour and a half. It lagged for ages here, and it did this multiple times across multiple tracks. It literally locks the game up and hangs there for upwards of 20 to 30 seconds doing nothing at all, with the background sound still playing. So they definitely need to improve the work on this version for PC. It's certainly not stable, and it's certainly not consistent, and this is a requirement. Now, here running at 1440p, and as you can see the options boosting them up a little bit with MSAA, improving the texture filtering, it's certainly a lot sharper and cleaner than the 1080p, that's 1920 by 1080, that the Xbox One S is running at. But outside of that, in action and play, you're not going to see a huge difference. This is a title and an engine that's certainly geared up towards performance and visual clarity over post-process effects and filters, which is preferred in a racing title that targets the high refresh rate and input rate that these titles need. But here on the PC, we're not seeing that consistently at this point, and let's be clear here, none of these issues are relating to the hardware at all. This hardware could deliver a much better performing title than what we're seeing at this point. The issues aren't related to CPU, GPU or anything like that. They're simply the element of this demo not quite being up to factory levels at this point for release, and I'm sure they'll work and improve it like they've done on previous Windows 10 titles. But as it stands at the moment, the Xbox One S delivers a much more consistent and enjoyable experience in terms of performance and play. The PC's benefits do come in the options sections, allowing you to boost it up and over above the Xbox One S here, so you can bump the resolution up to 4K if you've got the hardware. But here at 1440p with 8 times MSAA and better texture filtering, you get a much cleaner and sharper image overall than you do on the Xbox One S, which looks a little shimmery, specifically on a 4K screen. This is alleviated quite drastically when you bump it up to 1440p here on the PC, and that gives you a much cleaner and sharper image overall than what we're seeing on the Xbox One S, which is still very impressive and clean indeed. Now, both versions, both the Windows 10 and the Xbox One S, support HDR. Obviously the standard Xbox One unfortunately doesn't support that, but they do differ ever so slightly in the output image on screen. The PC version comes across as a much brighter image overall, which loses some of the darker details at the expense of this higher image brightness, but you do lose some of that range between the color depth. But some of that may come down to the gamma settings and output need to be adjusted here for both versions. Obviously my TV is set up, a Samsung KS8000 is set up to work on this, and it looks impeccable on the Xbox One S and the PC alike, but obviously there's that subtle difference between the two. But we are also talking about an Nvidia GPU here on the PC versus an AMD GPU here on the Xbox One S, so it may be different on AMD cards on the PC, and I'll test that at a later date. The material system has been improved, specifically on the interiors, with decent levels of Fresnel calculations across the stick's fabric and the leather, and also where the light diffuses and bounces off the interior objects. You can notice the micro details on some of the plastics on the dashboard, and also the suede across the steering wheel of the Porsche here. So that kind of side of it has been improved, but you've also got to remember that this is a 60 FPS title on hardware such as the Xbox One S. So what they're achieving here is very impressive indeed, but you can see the cutbacks on things like verts on the hands and stuff and other objects in the game, cutting back that quality in the vertex points to keep the frame rate as high as it does. And it works very well, but unfortunately it does leave the game still not looking like a huge leap over previous titles. This is not to say there's not some impressive and highlight points in this title. Certainly the Dubai track here is the standout racetrack and visual feature here, with the bounce light on the rock edges, the reflections on the roads, obviously the cube map reflections and screen space reflections is a mixture there, but everything comes together. They've used a lot of detail in the background and also the alpha effects, some of the sand sweeping across the tracks. Yes, you can notice some of the edges on this and some of the lower quality res on those areas, but again this is a 60Hz title, so these sacrifices have to come. But the other tracks don't really stand up to that level of scrutiny. Certainly the alternate levels of filtering on the textures themselves, certainly the road is better filtered, but then the grass edges with their alpha effects on top of them can be a lower texture filter, and you can notice this sometimes. The Nürburgring is a nice looking track, certainly with the rain effects. Even if they're not a million miles away from what we saw in Forza 6, they're a nice addition and they add to the gameplay and the visual aesthetic, as does the lighting overall, which again is improved with its accuracy and its range. It's certainly an impressive title in terms of how the performance is, and it's rock solid, and I don't see any signs of dynamic scaling on the Xbox One S. I've counted a few sections in race and they're all coming out at a fully native 1080p. It's not to say it's not there, but I'm not seeing them at this point. But obviously on the PC and the consoles, dynamic scaling is everywhere, so don't rule that out of the equation. And again, that might still happen on the Xbox One X, even at 4K, but will remain to be seen. It's an impressive title, but it's still Forza. I'm not as impressed with the handling this time. If a Porsche GT does actually handle this way, I'd probably return it. I've certainly raced tracks on cars and motorcycles more often, and this wouldn't be the way I would expect a car of this category to handle. And it does kick out and spin out quite a lot, which is probably more realistic, but it does struggle to turn in. Maybe it is a genuine problem of the car design, but I do feel as if they could tweak the controls a little better on this title to achieve a closer balance between fun and realism. But you can always go into the main menu settings and tweak away on the driver aids and everything else. I tend to turn pretty much most of them off because that feels better for me, including manual shift. Whether or not there's more information in the full title and the full career mode, we'll have to wait until the final release. Once I get my hands on it and the Xbox One X, I'll be diving into that in far more detail. In terms of the PC though, I would like to see them improve the quality here. The demo isn't really indicative of the final release, I'm sure, but it's certainly not going to set the world alight in PC players when you're playing a game that has these small but certainly noticeable issues in their performance. If, on the other hand, you're sporting an Xbox One, then you can be sure this is as rock solid and impressive as all Forza titles up to this point. And leaving it there, that's it. It's a short one, but it's the main information points on this demo. It will dive into it in more detail on the final release, but if you like this or anything else that I've done, you can like and share below. Follow me on Twitter, read more on the website. You guys and girls take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.